The morning of my wedding felt like a dream painted in gold. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, soft and warm, as if even the universe was blessing the day I had been waiting for my entire life. My dress hung on the wooden rack by the mirror, shimmering with delicate embroidery that had taken months to complete. Every detail was perfect. The flowers, the music, the venue bathed in soft hues of white and blush. It wasn't just a ceremony. It was the day when love, loyalty, and promises would finally take form. I remember standing before the mirror, makeup flawless, veil in place, my heart pounding with anticipation. Friends and family filled the air with laughter outside my room, and every sound felt like a celebration of the love story I thought I was living. When I looked at myself, I didn't just see a bride. I saw years of dreams, prayers, and memories leading to this single moment. My parents had tears in their eyes, not from sadness but from pride, as though the life they had envisioned for me was unfolding exactly as it should. The venue was alive with color and joy. Guests in elegant attire gathered beneath an archway adorned with roses, their chatter echoing against the soft strum of violins. Children laughed, darting between rows of chairs, while the older guests adjusted their cameras, eager to capture the first glimpse of me walking down the aisle. It was the kind of day people remembered forever, a wedding filled with beauty, expectation, and the promise of a lifetime. But as the minutes ticked on, anticipation turned into an uncomfortable silence. The violins hesitated, repeating the same notes as if to fill the growing void. The groom's place at the altar remained empty, and whispers began to ripple through the crowd. At first, it seemed like a small delay, the kind anyone might brush off. Perhaps he was nervous, or his car had been caught in traffic. I clutched my bouquet tighter, reassuring myself that love doesn't falter over minutes. Yet with each passing moment, hope began to fray. The best man exchanged uneasy glances with the others, and my maid of honor tried to distract me with small talk, but I could see the worry in her eyes. My chest tightened as the whispers grew louder, echoing through the hall like distant thunder before a storm. Every second felt like an eternity, stretching out the space between expectation and dread. Then came the truth. A relative, breathless and hesitant, whispered words I would never forget. He wasn't coming. My fiancé, the man who had promised me forever, who had stood beside me through years of planning and vows, was gone. Not delayed, not lost, but gone. The silence that followed was heavier than any sound, as though the entire room held its breath, waiting to see how I would break. I felt the walls closing in, the once bright hall now suffocating with pity and shock. My bouquet slipped from my hands, petals scattering like shattered dreams across the floor. Faces blurred before me, guests, shifting uncomfortably in their seats, some avoiding my gaze, others staring with open disbelief. My parents rushed to my side, their hands trembling as they tried to hold me together. But nothing could soften the sting of betrayal that cut deeper than any blade. What was supposed to be the happiest day of my life had become a spectacle of humiliation. Every camera, every whisper, every pitying glance carved into me, branding the memory of that moment forever. I wasn't just abandoned, I was abandoned publicly, in front of everyone who mattered to me, on the day I was meant to be celebrated. That wedding never became a wedding. It became a lesson, a fracture in my story that would change everything. The decorations, the music, the laughter, all of it became a cruel backdrop to the moment my world collapsed. And as I stood there, dressed as a bride with no groom, I realized that this was not an ending. It was the painful, uninvited beginning of something else. The truth didn't arrive as a whisper this time. It came like a thunderclap. My fiancé hadn't simply walked away from the altar out of nerves or doubt. He had walked toward someone else, toward her. My best friend. The words felt unreal when I first heard them, almost laughable in their cruelty. My mind rejected them, as though denial could shield me from the pain. But then I saw it, the unmistakable confirmation in the eyes of those who already knew, in the hushed tones of relatives too timid to say it aloud, in the way my maid of honor looked at me, unable to meet my gaze. He hadn't chosen me. He had chosen her. Her face flashed in my mind instantly. Not the stranger she had become in that moment, but the girl I had grown up with. The one who had shared secrets under starlit skies, who had been the first person I called after every heartbreak, every triumph, every silly little story. We had built a friendship on trust, laughter, and promises that only best friends make, the kind that feel eternal. She was supposed to stand beside me that day as a sister, holding my bouquet, fixing my veil, steadying me as I walked toward the man I thought was my future. Instead, she had been part of the very betrayal that shattered it. I could see it all so clearly, the countless nights we had sat together planning my wedding. She had been there when I chose my dress, when I tasted the cake, when I picked the flowers. She had smiled, nodded, and laughed as if every detail mattered to her as much as it mattered to me. And yet, behind those smiles, she had been weaving her own story with him. Every detail she had so lovingly helped me with was a cruel rehearsal for the moment when she would take it all away. The sting wasn't just in losing him, it was in losing her. Losing them both at once, like a rug ripped out from under me, leaving me sprawled on the cold, hard truth. The man I thought would be my husband and the friend I thought was my sister had written me out of their story entirely. They didn't just betray me. They erased me. The humiliation cut deeper because it was public. Everyone at the wedding knew who she was. They had seen us together, side by side, inseparable. To them, it wasn't just a groom abandoning his bride. It was a groom running into the arms of the bride's most trusted confidant. The whispers were merciless. Did she know? How long has this been going on? Was the friendship all a lie? I could feel their eyes burning into me, not with pity alone, but with curiosity, with judgment, with that cruel fascination people have when they witness someone else's tragedy. I replayed every interaction between the two of them in my head, moments I had once brushed off as harmless, the lingering glances, the shared laughter, the times when she had defended him more fiercely than I had. I had chalked it up to closeness, to the natural bond between two people who cared about me. But now, in the harsh light of betrayal, every memory became evidence. They hadn't just betrayed me at the altar. They had been betraying me for months, maybe longer, right under my nose, while I trusted them both blindly. The humiliation didn't end that day. It followed me like a shadow, creeping into every corner of my life. Friends who once envied my perfect relationship now looked at me with awkward sympathy. Relatives whispered my story at family gatherings, turning my heartbreak into entertainment. Strangers who had attended the wedding spread the tale like wildfire, each retelling embellishing the betrayal until it felt larger than life. I wasn't just the girl who got left at the altar. I was the girl who was left for her best friend. And yet, beneath the humiliation, beneath the heartbreak, something else began to stir. Anger. Not the kind that burned out quickly, but the kind that smoldered, slow and steady, feeding on every memory of their betrayal. I thought of her hands adjusting my veil while secretly holding his heart. I thought of him swearing vows to me in private while planning to break them in public. I thought of all the nights I had confided in her about my insecurities, my doubts, my fears, only for her to weaponize that trust. The betrayal had layers, each one sharper than the last. It wasn't just that I had been abandoned. It was that I had been betrayed by the two people who should have protected me most. One was supposed to be my partner for life, the other my friend for life. Both had made vows to me, spoken or unspoken. Both had broken them. In the quiet that followed the storm of that day, I replayed our friendship like a film on loop, searching for signs I had missed. Maybe I should have seen the way her laughter lingered when he spoke. Maybe I should have questioned why he seemed so quick to defend her, even in small disagreements. But hindsight is cruel. It doesn't just reveal the truth, it mocks you for not seeing it sooner. And yet, even in the midst of my self-doubt, I knew the blame wasn't mine to carry. I had loved honestly, trusted deeply, and believed in loyalty. If anything, that was my only crime. Believing that the people closest to me valued those things as much as I did. The betrayal said nothing about my worth, and everything about theirs. But understanding that didn't erase the pain. It didn't silence the whispers, or erase the humiliation of standing in a wedding dress, while my best friend claimed the life that should have been mine. It didn't mend the ache of losing not just a partner, but a friendship that had defined so much of my life. That day, I buried more than just a dream of marriage. I buried the girl who believed that loyalty was unshakable, that trust was sacred, that friendship was forever. And in her place, something new began to grow, something harder, sharper, and far more resilient. The betrayal had stripped me bare. But in that emptiness, in that raw, aching silence, I knew one thing for certain. This was not the end of my story. It was the wound that would shape me, the scar that would remind me, the fire that would fuel me. They thought they had destroyed me by choosing each other. What they didn't know was that they had given me the very reason to rise stronger than ever. The wedding hall may have emptied, but the humiliation lingered like smoke that clings to skin long after the fire is gone. In those first days, it wasn't just the silence of my empty room that crushed me. It was the sound of everyone else's voices, the whispers, the gossip, the questions that were never asked to my face but spoken behind my back with sharpened tongues. Did you hear what happened? Her own best friend? She must have been blind not to see it. Those words swirled around me everywhere. I went. At the grocery store, in the hushed tones of relatives who thought I couldn't hear, even in the sympathetic smiles of neighbors who pretended not to stare. I became a story, a scandal served up on silver platters of curiosity. People weren't just talking about me. They were feasting on my downfall, savoring every bitter detail. My family didn't make it easier. Some stood beside me in silence, too uncomfortable to know what to say. Others scolded me outright, as though his betrayal and her treachery had been my fault. You should have known, one relative said bluntly. Men don't just walk away without a reason. Those words cut deeper than any whisper. They didn't just question my judgment, they questioned my worth. Home, which should have been a refuge, felt like a prison. Every knock on the door, every ringing phone, carried the weight of someone else's curiosity. I stopped answering. I stopped stepping outside. I curled into myself, afraid of facing a world that seemed eager to remind me of my humiliation. Nights became the hardest. I would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the day again and again like a cruel film on repeat. The dress, the altar, the silence, the whispers. Sleep never came easily, and when it did, it brought dreams that felt more like nightmares. Visions of him standing with her, of laughter shared at my expense, of vows broken with a smile. Food lost its taste. Days blurred into nights. Nights into days. My body moved, but my spirit felt hollow. It wasn't just heartbreak. It was the collapse of everything I thought I knew. The man I had loved, the friend I had trusted, the family who was supposed to protect me, all had slipped through my fingers, leaving me alone with nothing but their absence. What made it worse was the betrayal of society itself. People didn't just pity me, they judged me. To them, I wasn't the victim. I was the foolish bride who had been too blind, too trusting, too naive. They couldn't understand that trust isn't blindness. It's the very foundation of love and friendship. But instead of sympathy, I received condemnation, as though I had invited this disaster by daring to believe in loyalty. The shame seeped into everything. I could no longer walk into a cafe without imagining the whispers following me. I could no longer scroll through social media without stumbling across veiled references to that wedding or pictures of her smiling as though nothing had happened. The world kept moving, but I felt stuck, frozen in the moment of my collapse, while everyone else picked apart the pieces of my life. I withdrew from my friends too. Those who tried to comfort me often carried their own subtle judgments, their own unspoken questions. "Did you ever suspect?" they'd ask gently, but the question itself was a knife. How could I explain that no, I hadn't suspected, because I believed in them both? Because friendship and love are supposed to mean trust, not suspicion. Their attempts at sympathy only reminded me of my blindness, of how thoroughly I had been deceived. Slowly, isolation became my only companion. I turned off my phone. I stopped answering the door. I lived in silence, surrounded by the echoes of what had once been. Some nights, I cried until my body had no more tears to give. Other nights, I sat in the dark, staring at nothing, feeling as though even time had abandoned me. The humiliation wasn't just public. It was internal. It lived inside me, an ache that no one could see but that I carried with every breath. My trust shattered completely. If my fiancé could betray me, if my best friend could steal what I thought was mine, if my family could question me instead of protecting me, who could I trust? The answer, whispered cruelly in the silence, was no one. I built walls around my heart, not out of strength, but out of desperation. To trust again felt impossible, almost foolish. Every smile looked suspicious. Every kind word felt like a lie waiting to unravel. Yet even in those darkest moments, a strange kind of empathy began to grow within me. Empathy not for them, but for others who had ever been humiliated, who had ever been judged unfairly, who had ever carried shame that wasn't theirs to carry. For the first time, I understood how loneliness can break a person, how whispers can wound as deeply as knives, how judgment can crush someone already on their knees. My collapse was not sudden. It was slow, agonizing, like watching a building crumble brick by brick. Each day took another piece of me, until I barely recognized the woman in the mirror. The wedding dress hung in the back of my closet like a ghost, its white fabric a cruel reminder of what had been stolen. Sometimes I wanted to tear it apart, to set it aflame, to destroy the last physical piece of my humiliation. But I couldn't. It hung there, silent and accusing, a relic of the girl I had been before the betrayal. There were moments when giving up felt easier, when the weight of whispers, the sting of judgment, and the ache of loneliness seemed unbearable. But even in those moments, something small and fragile kept me breathing. Perhaps the faintest ember of hope, perhaps stubbornness, perhaps a voice inside me whispering that this could not be the end. For now, though, I lived in the aftermath, in the ashes of a life that had been burned down before it could even begin, in the silence of sleepless nights and the noise of endless gossip, in the ache of betrayal and the heavy cloak of humiliation. And though I didn't yet know it, these nights of collapse, of tears, of loneliness, would one day become the soil in which resilience took root. But in that moment, all I could feel was the crushing weight of public humiliation, the kind that scars deeper than heartbreak, the kind that leaves you wondering if you'll ever rise again. The day came when silence was no longer an option. After weeks of whispers and sleepless nights, I found myself face to face with the two people who had torn my life apart, my former fiancé and my former best friend. I hadn't sought the confrontation. It unfolded naturally, as though fate had grown tired of the shadows and demanded truth under the light. They stood before me like a pair who had convinced themselves that betrayal could be repackaged as destiny. He spoke first, his voice steady, almost rehearsed, as though he had practiced these lines in the mirror. "You deserve honesty," he said, as if leaving me at the altar had been anything but cruel deceit. "The truth is, we realized we were meant for each other. It wasn't about hurting you, it was about following what's real. You'll understand someday." Those words stung not only because of their content, but because of the arrogance dripping from them. "You'll understand someday." As if betrayal was a lesson I should be grateful for. As if being humiliated in front of my entire family, stripped of dignity and left hollow on what should have been the happiest day of my life, was simply a stepping stone toward some higher wisdom. Then came her turn. My best friend, once the keeper of my secrets, the shoulder I leaned on, looked me in the eyes without flinching. "I didn't plan this," she said softly, though her tone carried more justification than remorse. "We fought it for as long as we could, but love doesn't ask for permission. It just happens. I know it hurts, but one day you'll see that it was better this way. You deserve someone who's truly right for you. Love doesn't ask for permission." Those words echoed. In my mind, a twisted mantra meant to sanctify betrayal. She said it as though true love could absolve the lies, as though it could erase the years of friendship we had shared, the trust she had shattered, the altar she had left me standing at. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, to unleash the fury that had been burning inside me since that day, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I listened as they cloaked their selfishness in the language of fate. They painted themselves as victims of circumstance, lovers swept up in a current too strong to resist. In their narrative, I wasn't the one wronged. I was simply collateral damage, the unfortunate obstacle standing in the way of destiny. "Don't hold on to bitterness," he said, tilting his head with mock sincerity. "You'll only hurt yourself. Move on, live your life. We didn't want to break you. We just wanted to be honest about who we are." Honest. That word nearly broke me. Where was honesty when he promised me forever? Where was honesty when she stood by my side smiling while secretly holding pieces of my life in her hands? Where was honesty when the invitations were sent, the vows were written, the dress was chosen? Their honesty had arrived too late, delivered not as compassion but as cruelty. I realized then that they weren't just betrayers. They were gaslighters. They wanted me to see my pain not as the result of their actions, but as a flaw within myself. They wanted me to believe that forgiveness was a duty, that anger was weakness, that silence was healing. They wanted to walk away cleansed, leaving me to carry the filth of their choices. My devastation in that moment was quiet. I didn't throw accusations or cry for explanations. I stood still, listening to their words like shards of glass falling around me. Each justification cut, but I refused to let them see me bleed. Inside, though, the pain was unbearable. To be told that the love I had believed in was nothing but a prelude to their real connection was to be erased, rewritten, as a mistake in my own story. What shocked me most wasn't their betrayal. It was their certainty. They weren't unsure. They weren't conflicted. They stood with the confidence of people who believed the world would bend to their narrative. They acted as though the only thing left for me to do was accept, nod, and quietly disappear from the scene of their so-called destiny. "I hope one day you'll forgive us," she said, her eyes glistening with tears that looked practiced, polished, almost performative. "We never wanted to hurt you. We just wanted to be happy. And you deserve happiness too. Just not with him." Her words landed like a final blow. Just not with him. As though she had the right to decide what I did and didn't deserve. As though her betrayal was a gift she was giving me, liberating me from a love that was never mine to begin with. And still, I remained silent. My devastation spoke louder than anything I could have said. I thought of the years I had invested in him, the laughter I had shared. With her, the dreams I had built around both of them. Now, all of it reduced to a footnote in their love story, erased by their arrogance and rewritten as their justification. They left that meeting with their heads held high, convinced they had delivered truth with kindness, that their explanations had somehow softened the brutality of their betrayal. But when the door closed behind them, I collapsed. The weight of their words crushed me in ways the silence of the altar never had. For on that wedding day, I had been abandoned. But in this confrontation, I had been told that my abandonment was righteous, that my humiliation was necessary, that my devastation was the price of their happiness. I cried until my body ached. Every justification replayed in my mind like a cruel lullaby. Love doesn't ask for permission. You'll understand someday. Move on. Live your life. You deserve better. Just not him. Each phrase layered with arrogance, hypocrisy, and the unshakable sense that they had rewritten the truth to absolve themselves. And somewhere deep inside me, beneath the devastation, a fire began to flicker. It was small, fragile, almost invisible. But it was there. The faint realization that their arrogance was not truth, their hypocrisy was not justice, and their gaslighting was not love. They could rewrite the story all they wanted, but one day, my voice would rise, and their justifications would be exposed for what they were. Excuses to mask betrayal. For now, though, I lived in the quiet devastation of their words. My silence, my tears, my hollow chest carried the weight of their arrogance. They walked away with each other. I was left with the pieces of myself they thought I would never gather again. But they were wrong. Loneliness is not always silence. Sometimes it is the noise of a world that moves on without you, the chatter of friends who no longer call, the laughter of relatives that hides ridicule, the endless hum of life that reminds you just how excluded you've become. After the betrayal, after the confrontation, I found myself walking a road I had never imagined. A road where I was no one's choice, no one's priority, no one's pride. Financial struggles arrived almost instantly. I had once planned my future, with the certainty of a shared life, 2 incomes, shared dreams, the comfort of a partner. Now, I stared at bills that seemed to multiply, each envelope carrying another reminder of my new reality. I cut corners where I could, skipping meals, keeping the lights off longer than necessary, choosing between groceries and bus fare. Independence had been thrust upon me, not as liberation, but as survival. Work became harder too. I would sit at my desk, staring at the screen, but my mind was elsewhere. Every word I typed felt heavy, every task slower than it should be. Colleagues offered polite smiles, but behind their eyes I caught the flicker of recognition. They had heard. Everyone had heard. My humiliation was public, and though no one said it directly, their silence carried the weight of pity. The social world I once trusted crumbled. Friends who had sworn they'd stand by me suddenly became scarce. Invitations stopped arriving. Calls went unanswered, and the ones who did stay in touch sounded cautious, as though my pain was contagious. "You need to get out more," they would suggest lightly, unaware of how difficult it was to step into a world that had branded me the abandoned bride. Others simply disappeared, choosing the comfort of neutrality over the discomfort of my grief. Relatives were worse. At family gatherings, I could feel their eyes on me. Some offered shallow sympathy, muttering "poor thing" before turning back to their gossip. Others smirked behind teacups, their voices dripping with judgment. "She must have done something wrong. Why else would he leave?" Their whispers carved into me, deeper than any blade. Because they didn't just question my fiancé or my friend, they questioned me, my worth, my dignity, my place in the world. I often cried at night, when the house was quiet and the walls felt closer than ever. Sleep became elusive. I would toss and turn, replaying that day, that moment, those words. My chest ached with grief, my throat burned with unsaid anger, and my heart felt like a hollow space where trust used to live. There were nights I thought I would collapse under the weight of it all. Nights where I wondered if life was punishing me for some unknown crime. But even in the darkest moments, something within me refused to break. It was not strength, not yet, but the seed of resilience, buried deep, waiting for its chance to grow. I didn't recognize it at first. It showed itself in small ways, in the way I still dragged myself to work, even when my body begged to stay in bed, in the way I managed to stretch a week's groceries into 2, refusing to let hunger win, in the way I met the mocking glances of relatives with a straight back, even when my insides were crumbling. Every time I thought I had reached the end, I found myself still standing. Bent, yes. Bruised, absolutely. But not broken. That quiet refusal became my survival. Walking down the street, I would catch glimpses of couples holding hands, laughter spilling between them. My heart would ache, but I kept walking. Passing by cafes where I had once sat with friends, I would feel the sting of absence, but I kept moving. I learned to live in the empty spaces, to exist without applause, without support, without love. It was lonely beyond measure. Loneliness that sank into my bones and whispered that no one would ever choose me again. But alongside that loneliness was something else, a flicker of defiance. If no one chose me, then perhaps it was time to choose myself. I began journaling late at night, pouring out the thoughts I could tell no one. Pages filled with questions, with rage, with grief, but also with determination. I will not let this be the end. I will not be defined by what they did. I will not remain the victim of their choices. Writing became my anchor, my proof that I still had a voice when everyone else had silenced me. The road was long and cold, paved with humiliation and shadows. But in those shadows I began to see outlines of strength. Every mocking whisper became fuel. Every vanished friend became a lesson. Every unpaid bill became proof that I was learning to survive in a world that had discarded me. The loneliness did not vanish overnight. It clung to me like a second skin, reminding me of the life I had lost. But slowly, step by step, I began to see that this lonely road was not just emptiness. It was a passage. A harsh, unforgiving passage, yes, but one that was shaping me in ways comfort never could. I stood at the edges of my own despair and realized something simple yet profound. They had taken so much from me, my trust, my future, my dignity, but they had not taken me. I was still here. And as long as I was still here, the road, no matter how lonely, could still lead somewhere worth reaching. The seeds of resilience were there, fragile but real, buried in the cracks of my suffering. And though I couldn't see the full bloom, yet I carried the faint hope that one day the road that had begun with betrayal would end with triumph. For now, I walked it alone, but I walked it still. Rebuilding doesn't begin with grand gestures. It begins with whispers, with quiet decisions made in solitude, with choices so small they seem invisible to others. My rebuilding began in silence, not the silence of despair that had consumed me in the beginning, but a new kind of silence, a silence that hummed with intent, that carried the faint rhythm of determination. Each morning, I rose before dawn. The world outside still slept, but I was already awake, sitting at my desk with nothing but the dim light of a lamp and the sound of my own breathing. My hands trembled sometimes, still remembering the days when grief had kept me from even lifting a pen. But now, I forced them to move, typing, writing, planning. The pain hadn't vanished. It lingered like a shadow at the edges of my mind. But I no longer let it stop me. Work became more than survival. It became my sanctuary. At the office, I buried myself in tasks, taking on projects others avoided, staying later than anyone else. Colleagues whispered that I was obsessed, that I was pushing myself too hard. Maybe I was. But obsession gave me something betrayal never could: progress. Each completed task, each solved problem was a brick in the foundation I was quietly building at all. Night, while the rest of the world rested, I kept going. I read books on personal growth, studied skills I had once ignored, took online courses that challenged me. My apartment, once a cage of sorrow, turned into a workshop of reinvention. I taped motivational quotes on the wall, not because I fully believed them, but because I needed reminders louder than the echo of betrayal. There were nights when exhaustion nearly consumed me. I would collapse on my chair, head heavy, vision blurred. My body begged for sleep, but I pressed on, because in that silence, I realized something crucial. Pain had already taken so much from me. If I surrendered to it again, it would take my future too. So I fought back, not with anger, not with revenge, but with work. Meanwhile, the world flaunted the couple in my face. My former fiancé and my former best friend lived loudly. Their photos filled social media, extravagant dinners, vacations in glittering cities, smiles so wide they seemed rehearsed. Friends who had abandoned me liked and commented, leaving little hearts and congratulations. I saw the images, scrolled past them, and let the bitterness sting me. But I refused to respond. I learned the art of contrast. While they displayed their lives like trophies, I built mine in shadows. Their life was flashy, shallow, performative. Mine was quiet, disciplined, relentless. They had applause, I had patience. They had noise, I had focus. And though I envied the ease of their laughter at times, I knew deep down that ease never forged strength. Struggle did. Money was still scarce. I budgeted every coin, skipped indulgences, and lived frugally. While they dined at restaurants, I learned to cook meals that stretched for days. While they wore designer clothes, I patched old ones with needle and thread. Outwardly, it looked like poverty. Inwardly, it was discipline. Every sacrifice became proof that I was investing not in appearance, but in endurance. Slowly, the seeds of resilience began to sprout. Small victories reminded me that my path, though painful, was leading somewhere. A promotion at work, earned not through charm, but through sheer persistence. A skill mastered after months of late-night practice. A moment when I caught my own. Reflection and realized I no longer looked broken, only determined. There were setbacks, of course. Rejections, failures, moments when progress felt like sand slipping through my fingers. I cried more than once into my pillow, furious that life still demanded more from me when it had already taken so much. But even in those breakdowns, I noticed something. I always got back up. My tears didn't end the journey, they fueled it. Silence became my armor. I stopped defending myself against gossip. I stopped explaining my choices. I let people think what they wanted because their voices no longer dictated my worth. The same silence they once mistook for weakness had transformed into strategy. While they mocked, I built. While they doubted, I worked. While they forgot me, I forged a self that even betrayal couldn't erase. Sometimes I imagined what they would think if they saw me like this. Sleepless, focused, driven. Would they laugh at my modest victories? Would they dismiss my discipline as desperation? Perhaps, but their laughter had lost its power. I no longer built for their recognition. I built for myself. The contrast between our lives became clearer with time. They seemed to chase validation, flaunting their happiness like a performance. I chased growth, invisible but real, measured not in applause but in resilience. They looked radiant on the surface, but I could see the cracks in their performance: forced smiles, exaggerated captions, a desperate need for the world to believe in their love. My life was plain, even unremarkable to outsiders, but it was authentic. And authenticity, I discovered, has a strength no facade can imitate. Building in silence was not glamorous. It was lonely, grueling, and often thankless. But it was real. And in that reality, I found a kind of power I never knew I had. Each night I whispered to myself, "Keep going. Keep building." One day, this silence will speak louder than any betrayal ever did. I understood then that resilience is not built in applause. It is built in solitude. Triumph does not begin with recognition. It begins with persistence when no one is watching. The couple had stolen my wedding, my trust, my friends, but they had unknowingly given me something greater: the chance to rise. In silence, to transform pain into patience, and patience into power. The world saw them shining in the spotlight. They did not see me. But the road I was walking, the one paved with sacrifice, determination, and discipline, was leading me to a stage they would never reach. For silence, I learned, has its own roar. And when the time comes, it echoes louder than applause, louder than betrayal, louder than the shallow noise of those who once mocked you. For now, I continued to build, brick by brick, night after night, with nothing but the quiet promise that one day my silence would not just protect me, it would define me. At first, their love story looked invincible. To the world, they were the golden couple, smiling in photographs, dressed in coordinated outfits, sipping wine at rooftop restaurants while the skyline glittered behind them. Their life seemed like one long celebration, the kind of fairy tale that people envied and gossiped about in equal measure. Friends of friends whispered about their success, their happiness, their glow. And though I pretended not to notice, I often saw their curated lives on social media, carefully staged to prove a point, that they had won and I had lost. But perfection is a fragile mask. And masks always crack. The first whispers came softly, carried on the same kind of hushed tones that once spread my humiliation. "They've been fighting a lot," someone mentioned at a gathering, eyes darting around to make sure no one overheard. "He's not doing so well at work," another added, lowering her voice. I didn't ask for these stories, but somehow they always found me. Society, so eager once to shame me, now delivered their secrets to my doorstep. I tried to dismiss it. At first, I told myself I didn't care, that their struggles were none of my business. But late at night, when the silence around me grew heavy, I couldn't help but replay the rumors. They argued at parties. She accused him of flirting with other women. He accused her of spending too much money. The paradise they had built on stolen trust was beginning to crumble under its own weight. And then, the signs appeared publicly. Their photos became less frequent, their smiles less genuine. Once she posted a picture of them at dinner. His eyes were distant, his smile forced, as though he'd rather be anywhere else. Another time, she shared an inspirational quote about choosing yourself even when others don't. People noticed. Comments shifted from admiration to speculation. What was once a chorus of congratulations became a theater of doubt. Financial troubles followed. He had quit his stable job to chase a business venture, one that had promised riches but instead delivered losses. Their lavish lifestyle, funded by borrowed money and parental pride, started to strain. The designer bags and champagne brunches grew fewer. The vacations stopped. Friends whispered that bills piled up, that their perfect home was filled with arguments about expenses. Trust, once stolen from me, became their battleground. She questioned his late nights. He resented her. Dependence. They accused, they defended, they broke down. What had begun as a triumph of betrayal turned into a war of survival. The very bond they sacrificed everything for was turning against them. I won't pretend I didn't feel something when I heard these things. There was a sharp satisfaction in knowing that the world could finally see what I had always known. That betrayal cannot be the foundation of a lasting home. Love stolen is love poisoned. Loyalty taken by force is loyalty destined to rot. Still, I didn't gloat openly. I carried my quiet victories as I had carried my pain, in silence. And silence was sweeter this time, because while their world cracked in full view of others, mine was slowly piecing itself together. While they argued over dwindling resources, I was building new ones. While their smiles faded in photographs, mine grew in places no camera could capture. In my progress, my stability, my resilience. The same people who once pitied me now pitied them. Society, cruel and fickle, turned its attention their way. "Did you hear they're in trouble?" Neighbors whispered. "It's not working." Out the way they thought. Some who once praised their so-called true love now muttered about how foolish they had been, how selfish. The applause they once basked in had faded into murmurs of mockery. I began to see them differently too. Not as villains who had destroyed me, but as architects of their own downfall. They had traded loyalty for desire, stability for spectacle, sincerity for performance. And performance is exhausting. It always collapses eventually. There was one moment that etched itself into my memory. I saw them by chance at a cafe. They sat together but apart, their bodies close, their spirits miles away. She scrolled through her phone, avoiding his gaze. He stared blankly at his coffee, tapping the table as though counting the seconds until escape. The silence between them was louder than any argument. And in that silence, I recognized something. The same emptiness that had once consumed me now belonged to them. It wasn't revenge that filled me in that moment. It wasn't even triumph. It was clarity. Clarity that life doesn't need my interference to deliver justice. Clarity that time has a way of exposing truth no matter how deeply it is buried. They had built their paradise on betrayal, and betrayal is a foundation that always cracks. Their downfall didn't restore what I lost. It didn't erase the humiliation or the nights of tears. But it gave me perspective. It reminded me that the world balances itself in strange ways, that sometimes the very people who laugh at your pain end up crying in the same spotlight. The whispers grew louder as their cracks widened. Friends distanced themselves, not out of loyalty to me, but out of discomfort with them. Invitations stopped arriving. Their circle shrank. The same society that once worshipped their love story now dissected it like a tragedy. It was doomed. From the start, people said, as though they had always known. And I walked past the whispers with a steady heart, because for the first time, I understood that their story no longer mattered to me. Their cracks were theirs to mend, or to break completely. I didn't need their failure to define my success. I had already defined it myself. Still, I won't deny it. Sometimes at night, when I remembered the girl who once stood humiliated at the altar, I allowed myself a small smile. Not of cruelty, but of recognition. Recognition that the tables had turned, that the spotlight of judgment had shifted. Recognition that the justice I had longed for didn't come through vengeance, but through patience. Their paradise had cracked, and through those cracks the truth had finally emerged. They weren't winners. They weren't untouchable. They were just two people who had mistaken betrayal for love, and love has no mercy when it is built on lies. And I I was still standing. Stronger, wiser, whole. There comes a point in every story where the tide turns, not suddenly, not with dramatic fanfare, but with the quiet certainty of dawn after the longest night. For me, that moment was not marked by a single event, but by a series of victories that stacked one on top of another until I realized I had risen. I had been reduced to ashes, humiliated in front of everyone I knew, abandoned by the very people who were supposed to stand beside me. And yet, from those ashes, I found wings. It began with work. My career had once been just a way to survive, to keep food on the table and a roof over my head when support vanished. But survival turned into ambition, and ambition grew into something bigger. Vision. I worked tirelessly, pouring into my craft not only my hours, but the very energy that used to fuel my grief. Every late night became a step forward. Every rejection became a lesson sharpened into strategy. I refused to waste time proving myself to the people who betrayed me. I chose instead to prove myself to the one person who mattered most, me. And the world noticed. At first it was small. Praise from a manager, a glowing review from a client, an opportunity that seemed just out of reach but somehow fell into my lap because I was prepared. Then doors opened wider. A project I led outperformed expectations. My name, once spoken only in pity, was now mentioned in rooms I had never dreamed of entering. The girl who had been left at the altar was now the woman people called for guidance, for leadership, for inspiration. Recognition came in unexpected ways. I was invited to speak at an event, my first time addressing an audience larger than a handful of colleagues. Standing on that stage, looking out at rows of attentive faces, I felt a surge of something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years: pride. Pride not because of revenge, not because of the shadows of my past, but because I had built this moment with my own hands. They had taken away the life I thought I wanted, but in doing so, they had given me the chance to create something greater. Financial independence followed. No longer did I count every coin, fearful of tomorrow. I had stability, savings, and choices. I could travel, invest in myself, and dream bigger without worrying about the ground crumbling beneath me. That independence wasn't just about money. It was about freedom. Freedom to walk into any room without shame. Freedom to decline invitations without fear of gossip. Freedom to live without the heavy shadow of betrayal. And yet, through all of this, I remained silent about them. I didn't post flashy updates to provoke envy. I didn't parade my accomplishments as weapons. My silence was my strategy, the same silence they once mistook for weakness. But now it was the silence of power, of someone who no longer needed validation from those who had doubted her. Revenge was not in my words or actions, it was in my very existence, because while I soared, they sank. The cracks in their paradise widened into chasms. Their relationship became a husk of what it once pretended to be. Arguments turned into distance, distance into cold indifference. The life they had sacrificed everything for was unraveling thread by thread. And society noticed. The same whispers that had once branded me a failure now carried their downfall from ear to ear. People began to see the contrast. Where once I was the object of mockery, I had become a quiet example of strength. Where once they were praised as the golden couple, they had become a cautionary tale. Without ever raising my voice, without ever seeking revenge, I had allowed life itself to draw the lines between us. And the picture was clear. I was rising, they were fading. My best friend, once the girl I trusted more than anyone, could no longer bask in stolen glory. I would see her sometimes, in passing, her eyes darting away when they landed on me. She carried herself with the brittle confidence of someone who knew she had gambled and lost. My ex-fiancé, too, could not hide his defeat. His career had stalled. his charm worn thin, his choices exposed as reckless. They had each other still, but even together, they looked smaller, diminished by the weight of their own decisions. And I was larger than the sum of everything they had tried to take from me. The subtle revenge was not in watching them crumble, but in knowing I didn't need them to crumble for me to shine. My success stood on its own. Their failures were simply the backdrop against which my story became even more luminous. Like a phoenix, I had burned in front of them, and now I soared above them. Not to taunt, not to gloat, but simply because that was who I had become. The transformation was not only external. Inside, I felt reborn. The girl who once doubted her worth, who once measured herself by the approval of others, no longer existed. In her place was a woman who carried her scars like armor, who knew that betrayal was not the end, but the beginning. I had been broken, yes, but in the breaking I had discovered my strength. There were moments when people asked me how I had done it, how I had endured such humiliation and come out stronger. I never gave them the whole story. Some things belonged to me alone. But I always said the same thing. Sometimes life buries you so deeply that you think you'll never see the light again. But when you start clawing your way out, you realize the soil is fertile. And what you grow from it is stronger than anything you could have imagined. That was my rise. Not loud, not vengeful, but undeniable. The final piece of my triumph was peace, not the kind that comes from forgetting, but the kind that comes from accepting. I accepted that I had been betrayed, humiliated, abandoned. I accepted that those scars would always be part of me. But I also accepted that they did not define me. My story was not about what they did. It was about what I became because of it. And so, when I looked in the mirror, I no longer saw the broken bride left standing. In shame, I saw the phoenix, fierce, unyielding, radiant in her own right. I had risen, not to prove them wrong, but to prove myself right. I had always been enough, more than enough. The ashes of my past were still there, but they no longer weighed me down. They were the soil from which my wings had grown. And as I soared higher, I carried with me the quiet knowledge that the greatest revenge is not in returning pain for pain, but in living so fully, so freely, that those who betrayed you realize they never had the power to break you in the first place. This was my rise, my rebirth, my silent, undeniable triumph. There is a particular weight to gatherings, family dinners, reunions, celebrations, that once crushed me. They used to be arenas where comparisons were drawn like knives, where whispers became daggers, and where my shame was paraded for entertainment. But this time, the stage was different. I did not walk into that room as the girl abandoned at the altar. I walked in as a woman who had rebuilt herself from ashes into fire, whose success could not be denied, whose presence shifted the atmosphere the moment I crossed the threshold. The occasion was a family gathering, one of those sprawling affairs where distant relatives surfaced with exaggerated hugs and louder-than-necessary laughter. The same faces that once pitied me, or worse, mocked me, were all there. But their eyes didn't meet me with pity this time. They followed me with curiosity, with restrained admiration, with the silent acknowledgement of a story they had no choice but to respect. I carried myself simply. No need for flashy displays. No need for armor of extravagance. My success was not a performance, it was a fact. The outfit I wore was elegant but understated. My smile was calm, not forced. And yet, the silence that trailed behind me as I entered spoke louder than anything I could have worn or said. Across the room sat the two people who had once shattered my world. My ex-fiancé and my best friend, the golden couple that had stolen my future and flaunted their betrayal as if it were destiny. Only now the golden sheen had dulled. He looked weary, his suit rumpled in ways that spoke of careless nights and burdens unshared. She looked brittle, her laughter hollow, her eyes darting with nervous energy. They had arrived together, but even their closeness seemed staged, fragile, like glass threatening to crack with the slightest pressure. It was not revenge I felt as I watched them. It was recognition. Recognition that life, in its quiet justice, had balanced the scales without me lifting a hand. Their humiliation was not delivered through my words, but through their reality. And in that reality, I saw the mirror of my own past. The same whispers, the same heavy silences, the same subtle glances that once caged me now hovered around them. Dinner began, and as always, conversation turned to careers, to accomplishments, to futures. It was almost predictable. One relative leaned toward my ex, asking casually how work was going. He fumbled, offering vague phrases about opportunities in progress, and still figuring some things out. His voice carried no conviction. The silence afterward stretched uncomfortably long. My best friend rushed in to fill it, rambling about plans and side projects that sounded rehearsed and hollow. Their words, once filled with pride, now felt defensive, almost desperate. Then, inevitably, eyes turned to me. I didn't need to embellish. I spoke plainly, sharing recent milestones in my career, the expansion of my business, the partnerships I had secured, the recognition I had earned. I didn't boast, but I didn't shrink either. My words carried the weight of truth, of results that needed no defense. And as I spoke, the air shifted. Relatives leaned in, listening closely, their admiration unmasked. My parents, who had once invested their pride elsewhere, sat stiff and silent, their regret etched across their faces. I glanced at them briefly, not to accuse, but to acknowledge the unspoken reckoning between us. Their silence was louder than any apology they could have given. It was the silence of recognition, of understanding that the son they had bet against had become the one they could no longer ignore. My ex avoided my gaze, shifting in his chair, his jaw clenched. My best friend stared at her plate, her fork, scraping against porcelain in nervous rhythm. They were living what I had once lived, the public unraveling of illusions. They had basked in stolen pride, only to watch it crumble when the truth could no longer be hidden. I did not gloat. I did. Not remind them of their betrayal or throw their downfall in their faces. I didn't need to. Their discomfort was its own punishment. Their silence was its own confession. When the evening wound down, a relative, one of the loudest voices of my humiliation years ago, stood to raise a toast, and to my surprise, it was directed at me. They spoke of resilience, of strength, of the dignity of building without shortcuts or favors. Their words painted me as an example, a source of pride for the family. The irony was sharp, almost cruel, because I remembered the same voice dismissing me, mocking me, assuring me I would never recover. As the glasses clinked and eyes turned toward me, I lifted mine quietly. I didn't thank them for their recognition. I didn't need it. What I carried within me mattered more than any toast. But I did say one thing, softly, yet clear enough to echo. Success isn't about who others bet on. It's about who refuses to stop, even when no one bets on them. The words hung in the air, settling into silence. My parents looked down, my ex stiffened, my best friend's eyes glistened with unshed tears. And for the first time, I felt no bitterness, only clarity. The reckoning wasn't about punishment. It was about balance. About returning to the same arena where I was once humiliated and standing tall, not to prove them wrong, but to prove myself whole. Their downfall was incidental. My rise was intentional. As I left that gathering, I carried no trophies, no applause, no vindictive satisfaction. What I carried was freedom. The freedom of no longer needing their validation, of no longer shrinking in their presence. of no longer fearing whispers. Their shame belonged to them. My triumph belonged to me. That night I realized something profound. The greatest reckoning is not in making others pay for their betrayal. It is in becoming so undeniably yourself that their betrayal becomes irrelevant. They may have stolen my past, but they had no claim over my future. And my future was radiant. The girl who had once been left behind had become the woman they could not outrun. That was justice enough. Looking back, it is almost difficult to believe that all of it was my story. The heartbreak, the betrayal, the humiliation. There was a time when I thought I would never recover, when the pain seemed permanent, when I believed that being abandoned and betrayed would define me forever. But time has a strange way of reshaping our scars. What once felt like the end of my life became the very beginning of a new one. The story I carried was not just about being left at the altar. It was about everything that came after. In the beginning, I searched for answers. Why me? Why would the people I loved most cut so deeply into my trust? But the truth is, betrayal rarely offers reasons. It doesn't come with explanations. It comes with consequences. And those consequences test us in ways we never imagined. My test was to choose between drowning in bitterness or rising into resilience. Slowly, painfully, I chose the latter. Resilience did not appear overnight. It began in silence, in the lonely hours when no one believed in me, in the late nights where tears blurred the pages of my work, in the moments where I felt like giving up but didn't. Each small act of persistence became a thread, and together, those threads wove a new identity. I was no longer defined by what had been taken from me. I became defined by what I built in its place. What betrayal stole from me was not my future. It was only a version of it. At first, I thought I had lost everything. But in losing, I discovered freedom. Freedom to design my life without the weight of others' expectations, without begging for their approval, without living in the shadow of their choices. That freedom became the soil in which I planted new dreams, dreams entirely my own. There is a power in being underestimated. My ex and my best friend believed they had reduced me to nothing when they walked away together. My parents and relatives believed I was finished when they pitied me, whispered about me, and dismissed me. What they didn't understand was that underestimation is fuel. Every sneer, every doubt, every whisper became a spark that lit the fire inside me. They handed me pain, but I turned it into power. And power, unlike pride, does not need to be flaunted. I learned that real strength is quiet, unshakable, and steady. It doesn't shout in anger. It speaks in results. It doesn't chase validation. It commands respect. My journey was never about proving them wrong. It was about proving myself right, that I was worth more than betrayal, that I was stronger than heartbreak, that I was capable of building without their help, their support, or their belief. The irony is that the very people who once dismissed me eventually became the audience to my triumph. My ex and my best friend, once celebrated for their love story, crumbled under the weight of their own choices. My parents, who had invested their pride elsewhere, eventually sat in silence, forced to watch me succeed without the foundation they once denied me. And my relatives, once so quick to gossip, had no choice but to tell a different story. The story of a woman who rose from humiliation to dignity. But the greatest satisfaction was not their regret. It was my own peace. Peace in knowing that I didn't need revenge, because success had already rewritten the narrative. Peace in knowing that dignity lasts longer than betrayal, that patience outlives arrogance, and that quiet resilience has a way of echoing louder than humiliation ever could. If there is one lesson my journey has etched into me, it is this. Betrayal is not the end of your story, unless you let it be. People can strip you of money, opportunities, even relationships, but they cannot strip you of will. Will is yours to guard, to nurture, to wield. And when you choose resilience over bitterness, when you choose patience over despair, when you choose to rise instead of collapse, that is when your legacy begins. Legacy is not about wealth or fame. It is not about who applauds you or who finally recognizes you. Legacy is about who you become in the shadows, when no one is watching, when everyone has written you off. My legacy was built not in the wedding hall where I was left abandoned, but in the quiet nights where I chose not to abandon myself. Today, when I stand in rooms that once made me feel small, I no longer carry anger. I carry history. I carry proof that even the deepest betrayals can be transformed into the strongest foundations. I carry the knowledge that while betrayal can break trust, it cannot break destiny. My destiny was mine all along, waiting for me to claim it, waiting for me to fight for it. And perhaps the most powerful part of this journey is knowing that others will see themselves in it. That someone, somewhere, facing their own betrayal, might hear these words and realize they too can rise. That humiliation is not permanent. That heartbreak is not the end. That even when the people you trust most abandon you, you still have yourself, and that is enough to rebuild everything. To anyone listening, I say this: the greatest revenge is not anger, not bitterness, not even confrontation. The greatest revenge is success born without them. The sweetest closure is not watching them fail. It is watching yourself thrive. And the deepest legacy is not proving others wrong, but proving to yourself that you were always right to believe in your own worth. When I was left at the altar, I thought my story had ended. But today, I know better. It didn't end. It began. It began the moment I chose to turn betrayal into resilience, pain into power, and silence into strategy. And that beginning has carried me here, to a life richer, stronger, and freer than I ever imagined. They gave me betrayal. I gave myself dignity. They handed me silence. I turned it into strength. They left me broken. I rose unshakable. That is my closure. That is my legacy.